Hey, it's Monday. How's everybody doing? You're listening to SOAPBOX Daily, episode 184, and I'm your host, Matt Morgan. Thank you very much for tuning in today. Yeah, I guess you could tell by the clock on the wall that, I'm a little later today, but it's been a busy weekend and a busy Monday. Let me tell you, folks, you might as well enjoy it because in about 16 or 17 episodes from beyond this point is when I'm going to be taking a break from the SOAPBOX Daily. And I think I mentioned this before in previous episodes, but it's just, I want to move on to other projects. So, depending on the public outcry, I'm probably going to take a break from the SOAPBOX Daily for a little bit. So I'm going to give you another heads up because we're down to the last minus 20 episodes at this point. And depending on, of course, the demand and the public outcry with this particular show, we will resume it. But beyond this, we're going to move on to other projects, which before we get into today's episode, you can check out at themadmorgan.com. Yes, themadmorgan.com for all information on all our podcasts and projects and shows from now and moving on to the future. So with that being said, and it being a Monday, hey, how's your integrity been this weekend? How's your integrity been today? Are you doing the right thing? Are you being a positive change the world needs? Only you will know, onwards and upwards. Hey, come on. Domino effect, folks. If we're going to make this world a better place, we all got to pitch in. We all got to do our part. So keep that in mind. Now, into today's topic. This is going to be a little fun today because, well, why not change it up a little bit, keep it a little interesting. I'm going to get into historical facts everybody knows, and that, oddly enough, they never happened or existed. But these are 8 historical facts that everybody knows. But interesting enough is that we supposedly learned all this, but a lot of it's not true. I mean, don't get me wrong, not everything you believe is a lie, just some parts of it. And history can be weird that way because there's so many historical facts, people, events, and objects that everybody knows about. But just like gossip, you never know how true it is. Yet, in this particular case, none of them are real. And that's the thing about history. If you come up with a really good BS story that really takes off, hundreds of years later, people will still keep repeating it and thinking it's real. That's how gossip starts. That's how rumors start. That's how a lot of problems start because something is not factual, somebody says, and a lot of people buy into it. And before you know it, people believe it's being fact. But we're going to go over a collection of historical facts that you may have learned in school, yet you know what? They never really existed at all. Let's start with number 1, the word ye. If you want to give your store an old-fashioned flair, you just call it ye old shop. That's what people did back in the day, right? Well, yes or no? They did occasionally spell the as ye, but if you pronounce it like the artist previously known as Kanye, you're wrong. Interestingly enough, the ye was still pronounced as the. You see, the English alphabet used to have a letter called thorn that looked like kind of like a small letter P, but with a little extended uppercase, okay? Or like a circle in the middle of a capital I. It's hard to explain. Look it up. A bit weird, right? I mean, that was also the issue with early printing presses. The lettering didn't have a thorn. I mean, it was just odd. So anyways, printers started rendering it in various ways, including Y and TH as it's pronounced. So yes, you may have ye old shop, but it's pronounced as the old shop. I know, interesting, right? These things I look up for you, it's interesting. Okay, so here's another one which, during the Cold War, people would find interesting if you've been around that long. The red phone. The red phone, supposedly during the Cold War, the US and the Soviet Union established a direct line of contact. This red phone allowed the leaders of each superpower to speak directly to each other. Well, this is what everybody thought, right? But not exactly. The line existed, but it wasn't red, and also not a telephone. Yeah. The line was there, just it wasn't a phone, and it wasn't red. Originally, the line of contact was a teletype machine. In 1986, it was changed to a fax machine. So originally, it was a teletype machine, Tel 86, and then changed to a fax machine. But anyways, the phone line wouldn't have made much sense anyways. Think about it how many Soviet leaders spoke fluent English, or US presidents spoke Russian for that matter, right? Didn't make sense. Okay, let's go to another third one. The third one here was pyramids were built by slave labor. Now, we've all believed that the pyramids were made by slaves. They were built by slaves, end of story. You've seen it in movies, you read it about in novels, and even in the Bible. Those cruel ancient Egyptians forced slaves to build their pyramids, except not. Sure, slavery existed in Egypt. There were, and most likely there were, some slaves working on the pyramids, but not everybody. The bulk of the labor came from regular day workers. Actually, they weren't quite that regular. Recent studies have found that the pyramid builders were actually fairly well well paid, and were even buried with respect if they happened to suffer a work accident. Yeah. You think it's just a whip and chain slave type of situation for building the pyramids. No. There were skilled laborers and everything else, and there was like a whole code of conduct. So there were probably some slaves too, but hey, most of the work was done by your average Joe Hotep. Get it? Your average Joe? Yeah, I know. My attempt at being funny. Okay, so here's another interesting fact that people might find interesting. Number 4, let them eat cake. Now, word reaches French Queen Marie Antoinette that people are starving and have no bread. In response, the heartless queen quips, let them eat cake. Famous as the tone-deaf joke is, it probably never happened, or at least there's no proof of it. The original quote, let them eat brioche, I think it's pronounced B-R-I-O-C-H-E, comes from the French philosopher Jean-Jacques Rousseau, who attributed it to a nameless princess. Marie Antoinette was a princess at the time, but for royalty, she was pretty much a nobody. No one would have cared what she had to say about bread or cakes. But the quote made for real great propaganda during the French Revolution, and it has stuck around ever since, believe it or not. Amazing what we hear, right? All right. Number 5, the Iron Maiden, which was supposedly a medieval torture device. If you asked a medieval peasant if he was scared of being put into an Iron Maiden, he'd probably just blink and ask you what it was. That's right. Everyone's favorite medieval torture device likely never existed. But I've seen one in a museum, you say. Sure, you've seen an Iron Maiden, but it wasn't medieval. The modern concept of the Iron Maiden wasn't invented until the 18th century, and even then, it was a work of fiction, not based on historical evidence. More people have been tortured, and this is kind of funny. They say more people have been tortured by the band Iron Maiden than by the real device. I like their music, frankly, but some people maybe not. But yeah, the Iron Maiden torture device never existed. Number 6, here's one that probably some of you have heard of, the chastity belt. Yes, since we're on the topic of horrible devices that never existed, here's another one. No medieval gentleman ever put his wife in a chastity belt before heading out for his travels. The concept of the chastity belt originates in the 16th century, and it started as a joke. The whole device was invented to make fun of overly controlling husbands. But it must have been a good joke because people kept repeating it. By the Victorian era, they'd forgotten it was a joke, or they figured they could just make good money by displaying fake chastity belts. And of course, there was also that one couple from centuries ago who heard the joke and for the first time thought it actually sounded pretty kinky. Okay, number 7, stockbrokers jumping out of windows. Well, on October 24th of 1929, the Wall Street stock market crashed. Seeing all their money disappear, dozens of stockbrokers leaped to their death out of the office windows rather than face poverty. You know what we're going to say, right? No, they didn't. Now, that comes from caveats. A lot of people, let's just put it this way. A lot of people did kill themselves as a result of the crash. And yes, 2 of them did so by jumping out of the window on Wall Street. Two, all right? But it wasn't the kind of epidemic you think. And the reason you think that is because newspapers at the time smelled a juicy story and decided to milk it for all it was worth. And then a bit more. Based on the news from the time, you'd imagine Wall Street was littered with mangled corpses. But no, it was only 2 aspiring gentlemen who met such a sad end. And lastly, number 8. I know we're going a little late for a Monday, but hey. Number 8, Paul Revere's Midnight Ride. You Americans could probably understand this a little more, but it's a famous story everybody knows about Paul Revere. We can already hear the torches and pitchforks at the door, but it's true. Paul Revere never rode through Massachusetts screaming, "The British are coming! The British are coming!" The story of Paul Revere originates from a poem by the revered poet Henry Wadsworth Longfellow, but he took a lot of artistic license with the story. Now, don't get me wrong, there was a man named Paul Revere who did go out on a horse that night to send word about the British, but he was only one of the riders. There were many more riders, and they actually performed better than Revere. Believe it or not. The unknown ones that are actually heroes. But no, Paul got the credit. You see, the man didn't seem to be in an awful rush, Paul Revere. During his ride, he stopped by a bar to have a drink, and he got arrested by the British. They did let Revere go, but confiscated his horse, so he finished his tour on foot, only to have people tell him to shut up since they were trying to sleep. Revere did play a part in the story. That part was just overly and greatly exaggerated. History, it's an interesting thing. You never know what the facts are. I've always said that history is written by the winners. So if you're not one of the winners, who knows how factual it is. Always cross-reference. Don't take things at face value. But this is an example of some things that we've always understood to be true, but there's no fact behind it. All right, so that's the start for a Monday. Hey, I want to thank you very much for tuning in. Thanks for staying a long haul today. As I said, we're a little on the overtime, but this seemed like an interesting topic to get into today. I'm your host, Matt Morgan. I appreciate you being here. Have a great rest of your Monday and a great start to your week. Keep your integrity in check, and I will see you next episode.